1/3 of the world's food is wasted, right? I think sustainability is a radical topic because the problems that it addresses are radical. We've got all of these resources like AI, but why can't we solve hunger? And I think one of the answers to that question is that it's a wicked problem. Wicked problems are defined as they're symptoms of other problems, for example. So why are people hungry? Because they're poor. Why are they poor? Because of the geopolitical situation or because they don't have an education. If you say it's the geopolitical situation, well, maybe we should try and start with the geopolitical situation as a way to solve the problem of hunger. Well, we can't solve the geopolitical situation because of corruption. That's a wicked problem as well.
Just sat down with Matthew Crosby. Matthew's a lecturer. He's also a musician. He's also an actor. He's also an author. And he's also really into sustainability, and that's what he actually teaches on. This podcast was so interesting on so many levels. We went deep on the concept of relationships, the concept of wicked problems. Yeah, that was a new one on me when it comes to sustainability, and a whole lot more. It's a long podcast. He's definitely coming back for part 2. Now, before we get stuck into it, don't forget to like and comment and subscribe to this channel and, of course, to Greenwood Academy. Now, sit yourself down, strap yourself in, and let's get stuck into it. I'm here with Matthew, and we were talking off camera about a few things and agrivoltaics.
In the thick of it already.
In the thick of it already. And I want to touch on something you just mentioned about books and reading books. I think reading books is very important. I'm a voracious reader, and I think it's very important to live vicariously through the author's eyes, because sometimes we don't have the time to go out and get those experiences, and that's where books come into it. Well, what's your view on books, and are you a big reader?
These days, because of my work teaching sustainability, a lot of the reading that I do is factual, and I realised this just this year and said, I asked myself, when's the last time you read a novel? Because I'm a writer, right? And it's important to keep up with what's going on. And so I went up to Fitzroy Street and into the bookshop and got a couple of books and brought them back. Michael Frayn, he wrote this book about art. I've backed myself into a corner here because I can't remember the name of the book, but it's a brilliant read. And you're right that like Michael Frayn, he's a famous theatre writer and novelist, and he takes you into a world. And when you're like reading, and let's face it, the writers that get published, they know their stuff. And with Michael Frayn, he's heavy on research, so he goes into 16th, 17th century Holland. Bruegel is the name of the artist.
Oh, yes, yeah.
That he's
one of the masters,
going to.
yeah.
And so as a result of, like, he goes into this kind of, it's a lost work, and he thinks that the character thinks that he's found a Bruegel. And the character goes and does all the research. And so all of these artworks are mentioned. And these days with phones, you can, of course, like when the writer sort of mentions an artwork, you go, okay, I'll look that one up. And so I went on this journey of looking at the artwork of Bruegel, there's that famous painting of a snowscape and hunters are coming down the hill back to the village. And it's got people dotted throughout this large canvas. That's his most famous work, I think. And I knew that one. But my goodness, his work is just immense, like detailed, beautifully rendered work. And then you've got Michael Frayn describing it verbally. And it's fabulous to dive into those worlds, isn't it, there when you're drifting off to sleep?
Do you think... Like, there's a lot of talk about AI, obviously. It seems to be everywhere, and there's books written by AI. Do you think that when we read books, we're not just reading the content of the book and the ideas that it conjures up, but we're also wanting to connect and understand the author. Please say yes, because if you don't, I think AI is just going to take over everything. You obviously know the answer to that question from my perspective, but I'd like to hear what you think and how you read a book, as an author too, especially.
AI, it's these days you can't have a conversation without AI coming in the first few minutes, isn't it? Look, I saw a podcast. Don't remember the name of the guy, but he made a fabulous point that of course these days AI is so good that it can produce a novel. And even though most writers will tell you that they can pick the AI, there's good research that shows that confidence that we have that we understand what's AI and what's not means that actually we're not very good judges of it because we lose our critical perspective on it. And you know, the research that I read was that we let's say being a teacher, these days you can't read a report that a student's written without having one eye on it going, oh, is this authentic writing? How much has AI been used? And it's not a question of whether it's been used, it's a question of how much it's been used. And so when you're looking at a novel, and this podcaster was saying, it's about the process of writing.
That's right.
Like of course I could use AI to write this book if I wanted to, but what would be the point of that? Because the joy is involved in the research, in the consideration, in the dreaming that occurs as a human being. Like it is a human pursuit. And when you're writing, I think that you have a concern that you're putting down onto the page, and usually there's going to be a serious amount of research into, whether it's anecdotal stuff or going into history. And you've got the reader in your head, however you conceive of that reader. You're imagining them as if it were a conversation just like we're having now, and to the point where you're picturing a particular person that you're writing to. And so when you flip that around, and I know from my own experience reading, you do imagine what the writer was thinking.
And that's the
time.
key. Isn't that the key? Because we know that AI is at that stage where it can produce probably decent bits of literature, but it's not just the content. It is the connection to the other human being. Like, for instance, Matthew, where did you grow up? What area? In
Sydney.
Sydney. So
Gadigalad.
And I'd say you were born in the 60s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like me, born in the 60s, Sydney. So imagine if I'm a reader and I read Matthew Crosby's book. He grew up, he was born in the 1960s in Sydney, probably got up to mischief in the early 80s doing this, and I'm the same person. I connect to you. I can't connect to AI because AI has not had those experiences. So I think that's, if people remind themselves of that, I don't think their authors will ever disappear, because human beings want to connect with other human beings and they want to understand that there are other people outside of their life that they may never meet, but they have a similarity. It's like when my wife reads a book, she's very critical. She is reading into the author's head. She's probably the most well-read person I've ever met, and especially philosophy. And I think that's where AI will never be able to replace, because AI doesn't know love and it doesn't know how to drive a manual car. It can read a manual, but it can't understand the feelings. So I think there'll always be authors. That's what I meant when I was asking the question, because AI can write these books, but it's like, I'm not just reading the book. I'm not reading the words. I'm reading a connection, a relationship.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm wafting.
No, I mean, there's an obsession with AI developers about AGI, general intelligence.
Yeah.
And everyone's saying, oh, we're going to have general intelligence in 5 years or 10 years. And I kind of feel like it misses the point. I mean, AI is already doing incredible stuff in medicine science, like the, the bifolding enzymes, is it, the proteins? It's this kind of projection as to the way proteins can unfold, and in that unfolding, it's to do with DNA and design of organic systems and things like that. I don't understand it at all, but it used to take. This is from the guy that runs DeepMind at Google, and it used to take a PhD sort of 5 years to write a paper to understand one iteration of a bifold protein, right? And over the last kind of 50, 70 years, therefore you had, the number of people that were doing that. There were like 300 versions of that. And that's gold standard research.
Right.
They've checked it all. And then the developer at DeepMind said, well, so they got AI to work on that. And it was able to produce thousands of iterations of these bifold proteins in a very short amount of time. And of course, the problem is that you then need to check whether it's worked,
yes.
whether these things are real or not, because we all know about the fantasies that
yes.
AI has. And based on what it does is it gives a confidence score of how well I, the AI, think I'm doing with the credibility of this research by checking it against the gold standard human research that's been done. And so I think that you've got this relationship, and so I think that it's a much more useful way to think about it, rather than thinking that AI is going to become autonomous, to use it as an augmentative technology where doctors are able to, like the other example that's given, that surgeons, when they're in the middle, they've got someone open on the table and they want to find out, they come across a problem. Time is the thing, and so they need to be able to get the most recent piece of research that will deal with this particular situation
in the quickest amount
step
of time.
In AI,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But when you're talking about the use of AI to generate things which rightly should be human pursuits, like writing fiction,
Yep.
I just don't know why you would bother.
Yeah. No, that's it. Well, I mean, people would bother from a commercial perspective if they can make a buck, but I'm in total agreement. And the way I see the AI, like a computer, AI it's a hammer, it's a tool. Is it the right tool? Not for every situation, but it's great at generating lists. It's great at bringing bits of information together, but it's not really creating anything. And it's great at doing things quickly, and that's where its probably main advantage is.
I mean, look at the here we are in Greenwood, the efficiencies that AI has been building into energy systems. In terms of sustainability, I think that is like absolutely fantastic. Rock on, keep doing that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I agree. It can be. It's benign. Well, I'll say one benign. AI is AI. It can be used for either good or evil, and everything in between, because there ain't no real black and whites. I'd like to go back a little bit, a fair way back. I mentioned you were born in the 60s and growing up in Sydney. Were you a socially aware child? Like when you were in primary school and high school, were you the kind of person who sort of understood what was going on from a sustainability perspective or an artistic perspective? Because you have that artistic aspect as well.
Well, so I was acting since I was a kid. My father was an actor, and so was his father.
Genetics, nature versus nurture. Always like to ask.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, there's a long discussion about that, nurture versus nature. But okay, well, let's get into that. I mean, I think that the nurture aspect is important there. So, for example, I did quite a few of the Crawfords cop shows when I was a kid. Homicide, Division 4.
Yeah,
all
wow.
of those things. Matlock,
Wow.
Leonard Teal, Michael Pate, all of those guys I worked with. And that was when I was, 10, 12, 14 years old. I'd be up there in Sydney and then have to hoik down to Melbourne.
Wow.
And, out in Werribee, down the gold mines out there and stuff. It was an amazing experience. But beforehand, my father, I remember sitting at the dinner table with him with the script, sharing the script there, and he'd go through my lines with me and be sort of questioning, well, why are you reading it like that? There's this sort of option. And by those means, I guess from a very early age, I understood the connection between the density or the weight of words as you express them and the connection to what your internal thought process is. And from that, the way, emotions arise as a result of the situation that you're in. So I think that understanding those sorts of processes when I started when I was 8.
Wow.
Like when you're learning that from a young age, it
Gee.
becomes sort of embedded inside of you. And I guess his father would have done the same thing with him. So, like, whether you call that genetics or just sort of a practice that is passed down father to son,
But there's
not
a
sure.
predisposition towards your grandfather and father and yourself, enjoying the process of being an actor. And because
Totally.
there's not everyone wants to be in front of a camera or up on the stage. It's a scary process for most people. Isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. It was I never experienced the sense of kind of stage fright
Wow.
or nervousness in front of cameras and things like that, because I don't know. Kids have a natural ability to make believe. They, in fact, I read some terrific work about this, about gameplay and children and what. That it's a biological essential for human beings to play games when they're kids, because it's the way we figure out strategies of survival.
Absolutely. Problem solving, create neural pathways, the whole bit. That's an interesting one. You mentioned that, though. They've done a lot of studies on people, how deeply they learn on a keyboard compared to pen and paper. And the neural pathways that they create when you actually take a pen and you put it to paper and you create these symbols that you interpret to have a meaning means you learn things at such a deep level. And this is not hippy-dippy shit. This is, conspiracy theory, this is fact, to the point I think there was an exclusive Sydney school last year, year 11, year 12, they didn't allow them to use computers as all written. Because at the end of the day, you're writing the exam anyway.
Look, last year I was in Denmark, and that they year 9 to 12 they've stopped using computers in classrooms for that reason. And it's been happening in Sweden for some time.
The Scandinavians are way ahead of us.
They're clever folk.
They are clever folk. So sorry, we digress. So you're at school and you're doing a lot of. You're doing acting. You're from year 8, and then you go on to high school. You're still acting. Did you act it in the school play? Of course, you acted in the school plays as well. Yeah. So you were acting like as a job and at school as well.
Yeah. Look, it's amazing. But I don't often talk about this. The memories come flooding back. One of my earliest experiences was I was in a production of MAME, the musical, at Her Majesty's Sydney before it burnt down. My brother and I shared that there's a grandson role in there that comes on for sort of this last scene and has this kind of comic scene with one of the lead characters. And it's meant to be kind of the ethos, the crazy, wild ethos of grandmother Mame is passed on to the grandkid kind of thing. And there was this exchange between myself and the other actor. I can't remember her name. She was quite a famous star, where she said something to me and I had to say back, well, but do you know but Granny called him and I'm going to say the word a bastard, and my mother covers my mouth. And this is in the 1960s, right? Yeah. So to say bastard on stage was a big thing, and so they covered my mouth. And so there's an element of timing there, right? Because it's a gag, and at age 8, this very experienced, it wasn't Maggie Blinko, it could have been Maggie Blinko, I can't remember, but there's a moment before you say, and my father was saying, there's got to be a breath before you say bastard to give her the opportunity to bring the hand in, right? Yes. And she taught me this.
Yes, yeah.
And every night we would do that, and it's in front of Her Majesty's. I mean, it's like the Regent here in Melbourne. It's a huge space, 3 tiers. And it was packed every night, this show, right? So there's an 8-year-old child in front of 1,000 people doing the timing with this gag and having the whole house roar with laughter, right? Well, that kind of experience, I think, it gives you this understanding of what the contract is between performer and audience, this sort of two-way conversation that occurs in real, like, forget AI, it could never do anything like that.
Yeah, wow. The euphoria must have been amazing too.
I think, there's no chance for you after that. It's an addiction immediately.
Yes. Well, that's fantastic. Did you, at that stage, are you becoming aware of the environment? I know this is early days, right? But I mean, I'll talk more high school. Was there any inkling in the back of your mind about the environment and relationships with community, the interdependence of all things, all of that kind of stuff? Or did that come later?
So we were in the eastern suburbs. We moved around a bit, first Bondi, Paddington, Darlinghurst, Potts Point. And I was a surfer. So I surfed for quite some years at Bondi and Tamarama there. And the surfing, that was in the 70s that I was doing that, 70s and 80s. And I guess that period was when the environmental movement was just starting up. We'd come out of the war. There was the 1960s sort of industry was really all of those innovations with mechanical devices and technology were coming on. We had the Model T and mass production, and the student movement. People were on the streets protesting about environmental but also social issues, like Vietnam in Australia was very big. So I was certainly aware of that, and I think because of my upbringing in a theatrical family, I believe that there was a strong social conscience in our household. Like many of our friends were gay because they worked in theatre it was just like often enough around our dinner table. I'm thinking of a couple of fabulous actors that were gay that worked right through the radio days into theatre, and there was never any, and this was the time when the bashings and murders were taking place in Darlinghurst. Right, I used to walk along that street home from school where those things were occurring. So it very much was a part of the world that I lived in. I think that there was a social milieu in those days that kind of accepted, one man's ceiling is one man's floor is another man's ceiling. What's that saying? So I actually wish for those days of social cohesion where people accepted the other person's perspective on things, as I remember it back then.
Because there's all that multiculturalism that came in as well. Again, I was born in '63, so I'm about, and there was like, Whitlam, of course, and then Hawkey, and then you had the Vietnamese refugees coming over, otherwise known as the boat people, and there was this melting pot. So you'd had the Slavs and the Italians and the Greeks come post World War, and they'd gone through that racist aspect. Then you had the Vietnamese come, and they went through it as well. But there was one stage, there was this liberalism, and that was really, it was happening. My mum was an ESL teacher at that stage, so she was teaching all these people, I knew the difference between someone from Cambodia and someone from Laos, and it was really, it was good times. And I'm straying a bit. I'm just now it seems we're cycling back to a more conservative era, but we'll talk about that later on, because I think that does play a role with what's going on in sustainability and the whole bit. So you're at high school. What happened after high school? You're acting at school. You're acting professionally. Did you get paid when you were a kid? Mum and Dad get money?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Well, it's an interesting point. I mean, the industry, the entertainment industry has grown immensely since those days. I mean, in the days in the 60s and 70s, in Sydney at least, which was our world, every actor knew every actor. That there was, there was a pub down there on William Street, and that's where everyone gathered. And but these days, of course, there are thousands of actors, and there's 3 or 4 professional schools that are turning out graduates every year, and the statistics are that if you graduate from a school and up until about the age of 40, you're able to get work, and then the line goes down until you get to my age, and basically if you're still engaged in performance work, then you're lucky to be getting well. There's like 1% of actors that are able to support themselves with acting, but they're ones that are probably working in Hollywood because the market is so huge. Whereas we've got 27 million people in Australia, and just the market is flooded with American products. So. I mean, in terms of film and television, which is where you earn money, I do about 2 gigs a year, character role, really interesting work, and that would be the common lot of an actor my age. But then I'm lucky because I've worked a lot in Asia, in particular Japan, and saw the way that group theatre works there, and influenced by that, started a group here, and that's been going 20 years, approaching 20 years now. So we produce our own work, and that, I work on that full time as well as teaching sustainability.
We're gonna get deep on all of these things. When you were talking about like all the American work flooding Australia, etc., I remember the golden age of when we were pumping out some fantastic movies, Fred Skepsy stuff.
I worked with Fred.
I'm sure if I mentioned a few names, you would have said, I work with him, and then, things like Picnic and Hanging Rock, and there was so many movies, even Mad Max, I shouldn't say even Mad Max, that was it's
fabulous series.
It is.
Fabulous.
And I reckon the last movie I saw that probably didn't fall into that category, but had a lot of impact, was Russell Crowe in Romper Stomper. Oh, that was that was a movie. But there was a lot of grants back then, wasn't there? There was a lot of money for those movies, and now it's all dried up. And it just sort of ties in now that if you go and study arts at university, you have to pay a shit ton of money compared to doing something like engineering. It's quite ridiculous.
Yeah. I think, well, you've raised a lot of issues.
I have.
So, look, to put some history on it, like my grandfather was in the Dad and Dave films, right? He played, what was the character's name? O'Leary, was it? Orion, the neighbour of Dad Rudd. And, that was Kenji Hall directing. And that was when, so Australia was the first film industry in the world, and
wow,
it came out of the vaudeville days, and all of the actors from vaudeville went into film, and that was my grandfather's journey through that. And then Hollywood came on the scene, and the distribution companies demanded that cinemas will give you this one hit American US film, but you've got to buy that film with 9 other B grade, C grade or Z grade American films.
Oh, wow. Right? Is that how it worked?
Wow. That meant that the Australian product got shunted out of the cinemas. And so they captured the market, right? And so then my father, who was president of Actors Equity for many years. So was my grandfather. He and my big brother, who was secretary of Actors Equity, Michael Crosby, started the Television Make It Australia campaign in the 1970s. And so then there was the Australian industry was kick-started again. Well, now we have the streamers, Netflix, all of those ones. And they're flooding the market with American product again.
Yeah.
Now, so it just means that we're going through this continual cycle of struggling to tell Australian stories. And I mean, speaking about sustainability, the social aspect of sustainability, having agency in having the agency to tell your own stories is a part of having a strong society. And so if we're not doing that, then we're really kind of not acknowledging and celebrating our culture. Well, in order to do that, you need support. You need, with a market that is as small as the Australian market, you actually do need support for theatre and film and television to get a foundation. So, for example, the ABC drama department, where so much of Australian cultural content is seeded that can then go out into a more commercial forum. That's had all of its, over the last sort of 15 years, it's had that drama budget has been cut. Like out at Elwood, the ABC studios there. Well, their drama department, they had working studios there. They shut down.
Yeah,
Rip and Lee, that's right.
Yeah, it's. I think the building's still there, but yeah, that was a real hub for a while. You mentioned before about Matlock and Homicide. Gee, that brings up a lot of memories of those police shows. They were, and then I remember, and this will show our age, but Number 96, and that was a bit of more. Wasn't an A-B. Well, actually, that wasn't Hector Crawford. That was something at Channel 10 or Channel O.
Reg Grundy, wasn't it?
Reg Grundy, and there was a few. I remember it was quite a controversial.
So I was in an ABC soap opera that was before 96 called Certain Women. I did that for about 4 years.
Oh, that was a really that was a good. I remember we used to watch that as a family.
So I played the son in the family, and Joan Bruce, June Salter,
yes,
Queenie
June
Ashton,
Salter, I remember.
Ron Graham.
Wow.
A lot of memories there, and a lot of like wonderful actors, wonderful people. People like Queenie Ashton was on Blue Hills, which was a radio program that I think that ran for 20 years. She was this incredible household name that I worked with. She was about, 80 years old or something when I worked with her doing high kicks in the rehearsal room. Amazing person.
There was, It's funny, your formative years, like growing up when you're a kid, like television, was a big thing. Now we were talking, I'm thinking like the original Prisoner, Norman Gunston, who I always liked, and the where Norman Gunston came from.
So Gary McDonald,
he came from the Graham Bond show.
That's right,
Auntie Jack.
Auntie Jack, yes,
which was a crazy, eclectic, almost Python-esque kind of show. I think we'll stop because for the big portion of the people listening, they're going, "What the heck are they talking about?" But do yourselves a favour and go back and have a look at some of this earlier stuff if you're listening, because I looked at Norman Gunston again about a year ago, and he's still funny. That stuff did not age.
National Film and Sound Archive has got great collection of stuff that's freely available.
Okay, well that's I'll chat to you after the podcast about what it like, as in you have to go there, or you can just online.
Look, I was amazed. You go on the National Film and Sound Archive, and I typed in my granddad's name, Marshall Crosby, and bam, he came up immediately. There's a clip of a couple of the things that he did. It's an incredible archive of Australian film culture.
So we're still in high school now. After high school, what happened? Did you go to acting school? Well, you probably didn't need to. You were doing it since you were
I did. Yeah.
So tell us about that.
My old man said to me, you should. So I auditioned for NIDA.
That's the school, isn't it, NIDA? Yeah. Okay, well, don't answer that. It's one
that's
of the,
a deep question.
It's the one that I recognise straight away. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a terrific school. It was then a 3-year diploma course, and then I converted that to a bachelor many years afterwards. And you work there with people from the industry and do a whole host of workshops in different areas, and produce work with directors, professional directors doing plays. It really sets you up. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that I learnt acting as a child and taught by my father and all of the actors that I worked with. I mean, honestly, some of the actors that I worked with in those days were just consummate professionals that they themselves had come through, working, like Queenie Ashton had been working in vaudeville all her life, and then went into radio, and then when television came on, Certain Women was the first soap opera that was made in Australia. And so you get this lineage by working with someone like that becomes embedded in your soul kind of thing. Well, I think that I took that into drama school, and it joined a lot of the dots. But then I would say also my experience working in Japan, Suzuki Tadashi is a famous theatre director, but also in Tokyo, Shinjuku Ryo Zanpaku Kim Sujin. They're strong group theatre, ensemble work.
What does that mean, group theatre? Can you? Because I don't know what that means.
I guess the best way to, or a way that we might understand is if you think of an orchestra, they have instruments that they've got to learn technique individually, but playing a solo instrument is one thing, but when you hear the full orchestra together, you get that big sound.
Right.
And we understand the confluence of sound, especially when you see them live. You can see the way they're all working together, and sight as well as listening to each other is a big part of that. Well, those ensembles work together to understand the nuance and the cadences that the conductor is asking for from a piece of music. So you develop a language that you understand together by training and rehearsing together.
Okay, so you are like an orchestra. You're not changing members. You are sticking with a core group who begin to understand each and every one at a fairly deep level.
So that's right. So it's a very different sort of ethos to the freelance film and television work that you do.
And that's what you're trying to do here in Australia.
Yeah.
And how's it going?
Fabulous. So, I mean, the Thursday group, I'm doing my last show with them. I've handed it over to one of the younger members, Tessa Marie Illuminati. She's now the artistic director of the company. And we're working on a show at the moment.
She's got a great name, by the way. What a name.
So, look, at one stage she was saying to me, look, I'm thinking of dropping the Marie. And I said, don't you dare.
No,
it's a fabulous name,
it's
isn't
amazing,
it?
That's
Wow. Her dad's Swiss German. I think that's where it comes from.
Wow, what a name. Yeah. So so you've been involved. You started it here. It's been going for a while, and you're passing the mantle on a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still very much involved. I still train with them and working with this show, and I think I'll be involved with them. To be honest, I just it's a lot of work doing production and marketing and all of that the logistical side of it, and I'm glad to be short of that. I want to have some fun for a while.
It's funny, like I'm listening to this conversation as we're talking, and like this, you do so many things, and I'm trying to see the connection between what you actually teach, and which is sustainability. And we'll go, please go into.
Better get into that soon.
I think we should. The thing is, I was thinking that because I could easily talk and ask you about the whole theatre thing and relationships and film and just your journey. And I'm saying that you're an actor. Okay, I'm compartmentalising because that's what people do, right? I'll just say you're an actor, you're an author, and you're also a lecturer. So what are you actually? Like, are you just those three things, or are you something else? I'm sorry.
I mean, look, I guess being an actor, income is always, there's a lot of precarity involved in the business, always. There's not an actor on the planet that isn't relating to that statement.
That's a good word, precarity.
Yeah.
That's a good word.
Yeah, it's one we know too well. Honestly, there aren't too many jobs that I haven't done.
Wow.
My big brother Michael at one stage said to me, you should get a teaching qualification because all of these jobs that you're doing, they're, great experience, but it will help. And I had 3 projects that I'm just trying to think of the date. It was sort of 98, so just before 2000, I guess. And all 3 fell through, and I said, okay, that's it. I'm going to go and do a postgrad education. And it's interesting, before you were saying that your mum taught ESL, one of the majors, that because I spoke Japanese, I'd done Japanese study. After my work in Japan, I went to RMIT and did night classes in Japanese. And because of that, I went into teaching ESL, English Second Language. And as a result of that qualification, ended up, goodness knows how, but so that led to teaching business English, and then business English led into teaching sustainability. That was the pathway into sustainability. But yeah, I studied carpentry at secondary school, so I've done some of that work as well. Lots of different things that I've done in my life. Yeah.
That jump from business to sustainability, I won't say it's a leak over a chasm, but it's a bit of a leap.
Yeah.
And tell me when was that point where you went, yeah, this is important, sustainability? Like, I always like to ask my guests when the interest in their particular subject sort of start to,
I think, Valley, my life is a process of staggering from one point to the next point to the next point, like a drunk on the way home from the pub. I really, the business writing course stopped at La Trobe College in Melbourne is where I teach. It's a diploma course, and they said, but you could teach sustainability, couldn't you? And I said, yeah, sure. It was a steep learning curve. I had a lot of research to read. But I've got to say, the idea, so the definition, Gianna Moscato uses the definition of sustainability as the interaction, the interdependence of the social, the environmental and the economic dimensions of the world we live in. Well, that interdependence of those dimensions is a real thing. It's not just a theory. It actually I mean, if you want to look at it from a business perspective, these days you go onto any major corporation's website and right next to the investment tab is the people, person, planet tab, right?
Yeah, the ESG stuff as well. But let's face it, that is there because they're forced to do it from a green credential perspective, or there's legislation, or it's marketing, or it's credibility. First and foremost, businesses' goals and objectives is economic growth and profit in that particular order. I'm a cynical bastard, right?
Well, so
I they do it because they have to, I suppose.
Look, it's interesting. So I guess I've been teaching this subject about 5 years now. And when I first started teaching it, I was filled with the optimism of the concept of win-win-win for business, that if business does well by society and the environment, they're going to do good on their financial bottom line. This is Elkington's triple bottom line, right? I think he first wrote about that in the 90s, and apparently he rues the day that he ever did, because business has now used it for this slightly cynical marketing approach that you're talking about. So in the early days, I believed it, and I still do to a certain extent, because I think the reputational and competitive advantage that businesses have from sincere, sustainable initiatives is a real thing. But when, for example, I don't know how much you want to get into this immediately, but for example, like watching Four Corners and the Guardian report on BHP just this last week, where their plans for transition of energy to renewable electricity generation in their mines for large haulage of their minerals, that internally, outwardly, they've been saying, yes, we very much want to do this, but internal documents say that they're not going to, and they're pulling all of the resources out of that. Well,
wow.
To me, I compare that to Fortescue, where Twickenham Forest, they've got large haul, so BHP apparently is saying that the technology isn't there yet to make it commercially viable, and yet Fortescue have got pilot projects where they've got large haul trains and large haul trucks that are up and running and proving the technology. And I look at that and it is really disheartening to see that kind of action by a company that my father bought shares for me as a kid, right?
Wow.
Like it goes deep into the Australian psyche, that kind of, I see it as a kind of a betrayal. And so when in teaching the subject, I really do have to balance for students. I think it's important for them to see a path through where business can be a part of the solution for the problems that the world is facing. But at the same time, I've come to understand that regulation is absolutely essential. Otherwise, companies, I think that really companies need to be dragged to the table in some cases.
Look, I totally agree, and you're right. And I still think, because I am basically glass half full kind of person, that you can be ideologically sound and ethically and morally correct from a sustainability perspective and still make money. You don't have to be a bastard. And the long-term approach is the key to that. And that's where sustainability will play a huge role. There's a fantastic book, and I'm really bad at remembering titles, but it's from the CEO.
Here's my reference list.
It's from the CEO of a Japanese company that is one of the most successful Japanese company, and he's the most ethical, moral person. He's a head of Kyocera Ceramics, and it's a fantastic book. It was actually given to me by a guest who came in here, who used to work for Kyocera. They make solar panels. I'll give you the title when I get home. I'll send it to you, because his approach was to the business was so moral. It was almost a Confucianism, that ethics, the whole bit. And he said the money will come if you do things properly, and just how he approaches business. It's so ethical. It is all about love. It is wildly. It's weird because when you read the blurb, you go, oh, what's this about? And then you start reading it, and it's simply written in these very small chapters. And I haven't finished the book, actually, and it'll be a great reveal. But it's like no other business book I have ever read. And
this is the bit where we can put a subtitle across the bottom of the screen.
We have to do that. Remind me, because this is really good.
Can I come in on
please,
that? Because
please.
And I guess this comes across as a plug, but it is relevant. So you mentioned I'm an author. Yes, I've written three books, and the third book is coming out soon. And it's set in Japan. It's a ghost story that's about a work of art, an ukiyo-e, which is a Japanese woodblock print that travels across from the very early days to the 17th century to the current day, right? And so I did a lot of research on this, and one of the things that I discovered coming home from a performance that I did in Japan with a large company of Japanese actors, and one of the older Japanese actors, we're walking along and we'd had quite a lot of sake, and we're arm in arm walking along, and he said, "Oh, look at that tree over there, Matt-san," and he grabbed me by the arm, and we crossed the street, and this old bloke, right, like, you know, not woke, not a hippie or anything like that, put his arms around the tree and said, "Oh, I can feel the spirit of this tree, right? Can you feel that?" And he grabbed me and made me hug the tree. "Can you feel the spirit of this?" Well, I mean, it was the first time that I think that I really understood this, and it goes back to the formation of Japan, really, that the Shinto it comes from an animism idea, I think. The love of nature in Japan is a palpable thing. So, you know, they have this idea that every particular area has its produce that they're famous for. In the mountains, it's Iwana, the mountain fish. In Shizuoka, it's the strawberries and the tea. And they're seasonal. You can only get them a certain time of the year. And so researching that, and then researching Edo, current day Tokyo, where you understand that they like at the same time that London in the 16th, 17th century was a million, so was Tokyo, Edo. And where those in London, they're throwing all of their night soil, poo into treating the Thames River like a sewer. Edo and Japan are collecting it all and carrying it out to the fields and using it as fertilizer for the greens that were brought into the city, a few weeks later. They had I was just listening to a podcast last night about farmers being so upset about not being able to repair their own tractors, and this guy that has started building dumb tractors so that farmers can repair them. Well, Edo understood the circularity of the economy way back when, So they were repairing umbrellas and shoes so that they could keep going. So that idea that you're talking about corporations in Japan understanding sustainability in a real sense, it goes way back, way back.
It's interesting, isn't it? Japan, originally inhabited by the Ainu, the curly-headed people who have a very high percentage of being in the special forces and the police, and effectively, and this is a controversial area, and maybe he was not listening, but basically all the other Japanese came from Korea, and so did the the samurai swords. That technology and knowledge came from Korea. So did the ceramics and everything else. It's something that they don't like to admit, and also the occupation from 910 to 1945 by the Japanese. But I understand what you're saying. That the Korean, Japanese cultures, and let's face it, you're talking about night saw. The Romans had sewage systems way back. It's funny. These ideas are not old. They seem to come in cycles, though, and different cultures may have that idea at that point in time, and another culture doesn't. I'm wafting a little bit, but what I really like about the Japanese, and it's almost like a band-aid to what goes on in the modern world, is that you can meet a family who make tatami mats, and they've been making them for 250 years, and they make the best damn mats, and they're just like the masters because they've gone into a flow state and they've concentrated on doing one thing really bloody well, and I really admire that. I really admire. I am such a fan of these videos on manufacturing where they just, there's no narration, they just show the manufacturing process, right? Too, me too.
They are incredible.
I love the samurai sword making one where they're doing it, and it's like, this alchemical black art, but science, and they're just producing this wonderful thing. But I think, so for you, the sustainability thing and Japan, there's this big connection in your mind there from what you've seen, and is that a fair assessment?
I guess I was the books I started writing and researching those. It's 15 years ago.
Wow.
So it predates sustainability teaching and research, and so when I started teaching sustainability, I was still writing the books, and so the theory that I read there resonated with what I'd done research on in Japan. So the two came together in that way. I guess I saw this is the roots is look. Actually, in preparation for this and another thing, I was looking up the history of the definition of sustainability.
I'd love to hear that, because I have issues with the word sustainability. Because to sustain is to keep as it is, whether that as is good or bad. And I just like, we're going to sustain infinite growth in a finite world because it's capitalism, and which is the definition. Economic growth is good. Do we sustain 2%? I've sort of, bear with me, I've temporarily taken my Greenwood hat off, but I better I'll promptly put it back on. There you go. It's back on again.
Oh, I'd say, but I've had a look. I think that Greenwood is doing a great job with sustainability. You can keep your hat right on.
We are, but I'll my own view is a bit more radical, I suppose. I understand the economic world that we live in, but I just, for instance, with I don't know if you keep this bit in, but with AI, right? With all the power with AI, why the hell haven't they gone, okay, how do we solve world hunger? How do we create a more equitable distribution of wealth? I'm sure people have already done it, but I don't hear it anywhere. I don't see it anywhere. I only see AI being used to concentrate wealth in the very few, while the vast majority of people are suffering more than they ever did. And for what?
Okay.
Okay, I don't know. We'll talk about keeping this one into Yucca. I've got to say to Yucca about this. I'm not sure.
Can I show you this? Right there is wicked problems. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Have you heard of them?
No.
Okay, so wicked problems and systems thinking, and this is this is subject material that comes from Dr. Swati Nagpal, who is my mentor at La Trobe Uni Business School. So wicked problems is a concept that comes from Riddle and Weber in the 70s, and Michael Mulligan, or is it Martin Mulligan, we use his chapter on it. And it's this concept that, there's tame problems, there's critical crisis problems, and there's wicked problems. And wicked problems, so a tame problem is something like if you get a flat tire, there's a template of steps that you can take to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the process of taking the tube out, finding the hole, rubber, some rubber on top, put it back in, pump it up, and you can right away tick, the problem is solved. So it's tame because you go through a set series of steps and you're able to solve the problem. And you can transfer that template to anything that has a membrane that holds air, a pneumatic system, right? Whereas, and crisis problems are the same, except that they've got a time and severity element. So if you've got a fire, you've got a template for putting out the fire and evacuating people, but you need to act quickly and you need training for that so that people don't get hurt, right? And damage isn't done.
Time critical, gotcha.
Yeah. And then, but with wicked problems, there are no templates for them. So you mentioned we've got all of these resources like AI, but why can't we solve hunger? And I think one of the answers to that question is that it's a wicked problem, and that is so that the wicked problems are defined as they're symptoms of other problems. For example, so why are people hungry? Because they're poor. Why are they poor? Because of the geopolitical situation, or because they don't have an education, or because of health, or because of climate change, or it can be a whole factor. Okay, so if you say it's the geopolitical situation, well, maybe we should try and start with the geopolitical situation as a way to solve the problem of hunger. Well, we can't solve the geopolitical situation because of corruption. That's a wicked problem as well. And so you just go around these other problems searching for where can I jam a lever into this system to create the most beneficial change, and that's the systems thinking part. Well, it's tough. And ultimately the best you can hope for is to reduce the consequence for people that are hungry. You're never going to solve hunger, it seems, right? But I guess the point about that is that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, and that doesn't mean that you just throw your hands in the air and say, well, okay, I'm okay. Sorry about you guys. We have to be compassionate and have empathy for those people. Like, for example, what's going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo at the moment with Ebola.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a very good example where the world must mobilise both just as a point of human ethics that these people are suffering, but also for self-preservation. I mean, the first person has arrived in, I think in Brazil with Ebola, right?
Yeah.
And so again, we're faced with an outbreak of this terrible disease. So I think that wicked, when you're looking at the problems of sustainability, ultimately we're looking at problems that are by and large problems that are caused by human beings' interaction with nature and with each other. And so we've got to look to, if we are the cause, we've got to look to ourselves as being some remedy for those problems.
I think you mentioned something before about regulation. I think this is where regulation has to play a role. like personally, and I'm not talking from Greenwood's perspective, I don't believe that anyone should ever be able to become a billionaire. I don't believe anyone should be able to become a billionaire for many reasons, and one of them is that every day that I exist, because I have billions of dollars, I can make more money. And we won't even get into the whole usury false creation of income. So there has to be regulations in regards to that. So by regulating so people can't become billionaires without decreasing the enthusiasm and the aspiration to do better, to be productive, would result in a more equitable distribution of wealth. Because at the end of the day, we served all these things on these platters to say, oh yes, AI is great, this is great. But great for who, great for what, and great for when? Because it's not great for the average person in the street, but it is great for that very small percentage of people who are making a shit ton of money. And all the ramifications of control in whatever control means. So regulation is damn important, the right regulation. I mean, AI is a classic example. So reactive. People were talking about this years before AI came about, putting some barriers in place, but no, there ain't no money in putting in barriers. So you need regulation to stop this unbridled march towards whatever. Ooh, this is the most radical I've been on you can snotty hair. She's going to keep it in, but I think. Tell me if I'm. Tell me.
I think sustainability is a radical topic because the problems that it addresses are radical. I mean, at the moment, humanity is facing existential threats with climate change. Biodiversity loss or habitat loss is causing the interaction of humans with disease and animals on an unheard of scale. It's unprecedented what's happening at the moment, and like I think so. On the point of regulation, I think there's at least two aspects to it. Basically, what we're talking about is government intervention in business, and going back to the original. So there are a few definitions of sustainability. The interaction, the interdependence of the social, environmental, and economic dimensions of our life, but you can also define it. There's the Brundtland report. I think it's early 80s. The UN got together, the Club of Rome. And they defined it as that current generations shouldn't compromise the ability of future generations to survive, and that goes back to earlier, and this is where I was tracing back the definition. The Germans defined it as the notion of deforestation, that if you chop down all of the forests, how can we survive without them? So it's an old idea, and the notion of deforestation, for example, goes to a concept called the tragedy of the commons, which is it's an old kind of story about that you've got a common area of land
where they used to graze the animals. Yeah,
you're across it. Yeah, and so the food cooperative of the village decides that this plot of land can support 300 sheep and no more, because if you put 400 sheep on it, then the land will be degraded and you won't be able to grow any sheep on it, and that's where the tragedy comes along. And so going to this idea of extreme wealth, well, I think what that's about is that someone is saying, well, I don't care about the local community. I'm just going to make as much profit as I possibly can without considering that the resources that I'm using to create that wealth are finite. And so they come in and put an extra 100 sheep on beyond what what the plot of land can support. And sure, they make a killing in the short term, but the future generations and indeed the current generations suffer as a result of that.
Totally.
And so, I mean, in the old days, around the times when the tragedy of the commons was, when that sort of anecdote is talking about, that those sort of community norms became enacted as laws. And so you get this relationship between what society agrees is the right way to do things becomes codified in regulations. And so it is actually the job of government to enact laws and regulate businesses so that they don't do harm to society. That's the purpose of government, right?
Yes. I'm smiling. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm smiling because, look.
But so that's the first side of it. I think the other side is the initiation, the support and encouragement of positive programs. And so, for example, I think this government's Future Fund, where they're investing, for example, in projects like hydrogen, green hydrogen production, solar and wind, CRISPR, and the development of the grid in Australia, like the money that they're putting into making a smart grid. It's and then making battery storage for that grid, and all of the brilliant technology that is being brought on, like these gravity batteries that people are doing, and now we've got China has just opened its first fast train track that's running on sodium batteries, not lithium cobalt, right? All of these incredible innovations that are available to us now. They need governments to develop policy that shows, yes, we support this sector of development and not, for example, fossil fuels, and that means that all of the world's capital will flow into the development of that. So I think that it's both regulation but also giving signals to business that this is the direction we're going in.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When I studied, I did a certificate it was a 2-year course in electrotechnology. We did solar, water, environmental buildings design, PV, back in 2003. The first thing we were taught is the most important thing before we even start talking about batteries and wind and whatever is reduce consumption, is to tread lightly. And that is something that is been lost. Because there's hardly any talk about people, well, hang on a sec, instead of building an extra solar farm, why don't we start reducing our consumption a little bit without altering our perceived level of thermal comfort? But the only issue with that is no one makes money from people consuming less. So as a result, we have these amazingly efficient appliances that have got better. Fridges are way better than they used to be. All the new appliances are great. But the average daily load in the average Australian's house is still about 17, 18, 19 kilowatt hours a day. And it will go up with the electrification process because people just start to consume more. And people do not want to put on a jumper when it gets a little bit cold. They don't want to take the jumper off when it gets a little bit too hot. And the whole housing, the whole housing industry is building these houses that are laughing stock overseas. So, yes, and not to mention that the political process is a finite one in most cases. Politicians are feathering their nests for the private sector. So if they piss off too many people in the private sector while they're a politician, they got no job once their political life finishes. I don't know if we can keep this stuff in because I've gone harder than I've gone in any other podcast. Matthew was talking about wicked problems and finding those, I suppose, those points of leverage where you can crack something. Sorry, please, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Or just to recap, so the concept of wicked problems comes from early 1970s, Riddle and Weber, these two urban planners, and their 10 characteristics of a wicked problem, they're quite dense in their description, and Martin Mulligan has simplified them into 6. And I guess we use systems thinking, and there are different versions of systems thinking to find leverage for wicked problems. So, there are the 3 levels of problems, right? Tame problems have a clear template of steps. If you think of a flat tyre on a bicycle, you have to take the inner tube out, find the hole, patch it up, pump it up, check, okay, deep pump it, put it back inside the tyre, put the tyre back on, and you're good to go. So tick, the problem is solved. It's tame. And then you can apply that fixing technique to anything that a membrane that holds air, any pneumatic system it'll work for. So the template can work in different situations. Crisis problems have templates, but they, a fire might cause injury.
It seems like crisis problems have a time constraint.
That's right.
Yeah. That's the key.
You've got to get out of the building quickly, and you've got to do so in an orderly fashion. And that's why, you do training to sort of establish what are the steps for safe process. And that's risk management is similar for corporations. But then when you get to wicked problems, they're problems that are continually evolving. They're constellations of interconnected problems. So we were talking about hunger before, that like, why is someone hunger? Perhaps because they're poor. Why are they poor? Because of geopolitical strife, because of health problems, lack of employment, education might be a problem. And each of those, geopolitics, employment, education, are wicked problems in themselves that have other factors. And so you step back and look at all of these interconnected problems and go, oh my goodness, how am I going to approach solving this? And so you apply, there's a model called the Iceberg Model that's aimed at finding leverage.
Wow.
Oh, sorry, it's dense
funny.
stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No, I laugh the Iceberg Model because I just think of the Titanic straight away for some reason.
Well, exactly. I mean, so you can see what you see.
Yeah.
You can navigate around, but then the bulk is under the water.
Yeah,
and so the analysis using the Iceberg Model is where you're diving under the water to look at the root causes of the problem, right? And so with the Iceberg Model, you get into what are the patterns that are occurring, what are the structures, and structures can be geographic or political, legislative. And then at the deepest point, you get to the mental models, the ways that we conceive of the universe, the behaviours that we think about. So when you're trying to look at a problem like hunger, or climate change or deforestation or any of these problems, you can go through those steps and, I don't know, so choose one of those, Philly. Let's do it. Climate change, hunger, deforestation, energy. Energy. What about energy?
I think energy is the most appropriate. But it's interesting, while you're talking, it's interesting to see that there's, like, in nature, from an animal perspective, like, well, let's say talk about hunger, but we will go back to energy as well. From hunger, you've got a situation where, like the carnivores, if there's a weak member of the pride, say lions, they get shunted out. If they're old and toothless, they don't get really helped by the other lions, right? But in other groups, and I think it might be ants, but I'm not sure, the weak members of the tribe or the hive, they get helped. So are we, as human beings, are we members of a hive, or are we like pride of lions and just out you go? Disabled people, elderly people, unemployed people, people who are not as productive as the rest of us.
How do I answer this?
Don't. No. I'll just We'll talk. Let's talk about energy. I think because that's probably it's definitely more applicable to the Greenwood scenario and also sustainability, what you're teaching.
Okay, well, so
the sustainability goes deep.
Let's feed it just to understand the concept of wicked problems. Let's feed it through Mulligan's sixth characteristic, which concerns the different values and priorities of stakeholders. So, and looking at the Greenwood site, I saw the fantastic vineyard solar farm that you made with University of Melbourne,
yes.
right? So it's a clear example of two groups of stakeholders working together.
Yes.
One group that has a farm that they need sunlight and they need the nutrients of the earth to grow their grapes, and you would imagine that solar panels are going to cover up the sun, which makes the farm unworkable. But of course, what's happened there is that the two groups of stakeholders have got together and talked to each other and found that actually there are synergies that can be found that will be good for both groups of stakeholders. And so you get this win-win situation where, you guys have lifted the solar panels up high so
yes.
that the aspect of the sun can get through, provides shade during the heat of the day. And then what I've seen in other places is that cattle can find shade
yep.
in the heat of the day as well.
Yep.
Well, to me, that's where you're looking at what is, there are behavioural problems between stakeholders, and this is most prevalent in the wind turbine debate, right? Where, like for example, what's going on in Newcastle at the moment, where the locals up there are saying we do not want wind farms because they're ugly. That's the main argument that's coming up. I mean, there are other sort of nonsense arguments about health impacts. The bird strike is a real issue, but when you consider the numbers of birds that are being killed by climate change and loss of habitat as a result of climate change, you kind of go, well, there's a trade-off to be made.
It's a cost-benefit analysis at the end of the day.
Yeah.
They're saying, they're saying that they're ugly. So why don't they address the ugliness? Why? Let's paint, because I know in overseas they paint those towers, they gradiate the colour green on the towers as it gets up, it gets lighter and lighter, and it does look more aesthetically pleasing. So if that's their main objection, can't that be addressed?
I saw this on, If You're Listening, that terrific news podcast, and the chap was talking about Newcastle. And he made the point that if you were anywhere near Newcastle growing up, and I went up there a few times surfing, you would see the coal ships anchored off, because it's a big coal town, anchored off the coast. Like the horizon was blocked out by the number of ships that were there. There were a huge number of ships loading and departing. And you go, oh, so they were pretty? Like, I just think that there is some kind of a cultural, deep-seated, fear or dislike of the concept of wind turbines that is partly engendered by Donald Trump. That's as it is, right? And so, getting back to wicked problems, you've got to sit down with those people and talk and figure out common ground and get the information across, and in some way try to open up and shift the debate from aesthetic ideas of beauty to the existential threat of climate change, right?
Yeah.
So that's an example where what you're doing is diving under the water, finding the root causes, which is at base a belief and value system of stakeholders, and saying, well, how can we shift this situation so that we're able to get benefit for both groups of stakeholders?
And even going one step further, you may be addressing, which they tend to use this in the sales process, addressing unspoken concerns.
Indeed. So, I mean, many of these beliefs and values come from our parents and our grandparents and we actually don't know that we hold these values.
Well, the classic example is if you're presenting a proposal, let's say, to a client, and it's like a commercial solar farm, let's say, or a commercial solar system that goes on a factory roof. One of the most common unspoken concerns is, are you like, and you're the client, and you're saying in your head, are you credible? Are you a credible company? Can I trust you? And I would address that before you even say it by going, well, actually, we've done a lot of these jobs. We are ISO accredited. This is what, and Greenwood is, and we've got some testimonials, and we've done quite a few businesses like yours, because no one wants to be an early adopter as well. So there's this psychological aspect as well as people saying, oh, I hate it because of this. I hate it because of that. I don't want it because of that. There's all this underlying stuff that if you can find out and address that underlying angst as well, you can convince anyone to do anything effectively. So there is that as well.
Well, but I mean that's a real thing of creating trust.
Yes.
Between two people that want to collaborate on a common project.
That's
right. I mean, there's something very human about that. Very, I think it's an admirable pursuit.
Oh, of course it is.
For the common good.
Absolutely. And it's funny because with wind turbines, there's a, I don't know if you know Victoria that well, but Dalesford, Hepburn area, there's a community wind farm, and it's one of the oldest community wind farms, and one of the few in Australia, quite successful. And the community got together and they funded themselves this system, and it's up and running. And back to agri, I think the first agri renewables were wind turbines, because invariably wind turbines do go on farming land, and invariably they've only how the wind turbine companies do it, they actually rent out a certain amount of the land, a certain square meterage, and the rest of it you've got cattle, sheep, whatever, wandering around, because obviously the blades are a long way away from the cattle, and they don't have wings, and they're not going to hit the turbine. So it's and at the end of the day, we need energy, and is a choice between, do I go for this energy, and this energy? There's nuclear here. There's coal-fired power stations and gas, and there's wind and solar, etc., and hopefully some new technologies as well.
Yeah,
it's a hard one though, because it's nuanced, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the argument with wind farms and agriculture too is that having the rent that companies pay to farmers to house wind turbines on their land provides a base
Absolutely.
Level of income that means that they're in a better position to withstand severe weather events
Absolutely.
Caused by climate change.
It's not like growing wheat, is it? You're getting a guaranteed income, which from a financial perspective you can go, if you want to borrow more money to the bank, look, I've got a wind turbine, they've signed a lease for 20 years and they're with an option to go another 25, another 5 or 10, whatever. This is, here's my balance sheet, give me money to improve my farm. It's a mixed land. It comes back to that mixed land proposition. There's a certainty in putting a solar farm or a wind turbine, and if it ties in with sustainability, well, that's a good thing. I would go default back to, hey, everyone should consume less in the first place. That might help, but it's.
So okay, so I thought it was a really interesting point that you brought up, Felly. Sustainable consumption and production is one of the SDGs, right? And in sustainability, we study those.
So SD
Sustainable Development Goals from the the United Nations. There's 17 of those. No hunger, no poverty, human rights, climate change, innovation in cities, good employment, things like this. The right of education. And sustainable consumption and production, I guess it brings in circularity in supply chains, food waste, using renewables as the manufacturing energy source, but also on the consumption side, when you consider the advent of fast fashion, for example. or fast food for that matter, or the like. When I heard the statistic, I was astounded. 1/3 of the world's food is wasted. Right? It is just astounding, and can't remember which. 13% I think is wasted at the farm, and 17% is wasted in our refrigerators at home. And there's some percentages in between, obviously at supermarkets and then along the logistics chain. So there's something wrong with systemically if we're wasting that amount of food, because it's not just the food that we're wasting the nitrogen that was used to grow it, and we're wasting the energy that was used to produce it, and the labour as well,
and the
water
and the transport,
all of those things.
Yeah. 30%, that's a horrendous amount. And I mean, we could wax lyrically about the fact that supermarkets demand a certain quality of produce, no blemishes, it has to be a certain size. And once they've got the farmer under their thumb, locking him into these long-term contracts, then they start reducing the price. And I honestly think we don't pay enough money for food for good food in Australia. And I'm more than happy to eat things with blemishes and what have you. So, and we could also go the other end. I don't know about you, but if I left anything on my plate as a kid, that was you had to basically lick the plate with bread, and So, look, yeah, that's habit, isn't it? And yeah.
So one of the things that we talk about is the idea of upstream and downstream. And when you're talking about food waste, there is the downstream of customers and food going off in the fridge, and that we need to address the behavioural mental models of that. But corporations also have mental models and behaviours. And you mentioned the relationship between farmers and retailers, supermarkets. And there's a system that's operating there that can be analysed. You look at bananas, right? So if you go at the end of the day on a Sunday and try to buy a banana, you're going to find all of the green ones, all of the oversized ones, and all of the bruised ones that are left, and you've got to make a choice from that. And supermarkets realise that they're the ones that are left, and so they say to the farmers, we don't want the oversized ones, and we want them at this stage of ripeness, kind of thing. And so that means that the farmers are faced with having to kind of throw away oversized bananas, and that's where some of the food waste comes.
Or find another market for them that is not the supermarket, which requires a lot of effort anyway, set up the process and procedures. But they shouldn't be asked that in the first place, because anyway.
Well, so that's the point where we're understanding who the various stakeholders are in that supply chain, looking at what their situation is and what they need to function, figuring out what's fair and equitable for each of the stage. And there's problems between the contractual arrangements of farmer to retailer because of the power imbalance. But then talking about finding another use for produce that is not of the acceptable size and cosmetic complexion that customers want. And so you get, second bite, lentil as anything just down the road.
They still are right.
There are restaurants around that are able to use this produce. So there are ways that you can, you're never going to find a solution to this problem, but there are ways to mediate some of the consequences of it.
I go back to regulation. The supermarket's cheaper for them to dump stuff. I had friends years ago used to dumpster dive, years ago. And I think apparently now a lot of people are doing that out of necessity, right? Not out of any ideology. And the supermarkets are throwing away perfectly good produce into the dumpsters because from an insurance perspective, it's better, more economically viable to do that than to give it to charity, right? It's really like that. So that's where regulation, and that is horrendous in this. We just talked about all the energy that goes into producing a banana, and then a perfectly good banana ends up in a dumpster, and then you chase the security guard will chase you away if you try to take that banana out of the dumpster.
Yeah,
this is not right.
As a human being, it's pretty hard to reconcile the fact that we're throwing that food out, and there are people that are hungry in Australia.
That's right, and more as you know, pressures. And I mean, again, it's a first world problem, right? But it does affect us. But compared to, say, people who haven't eaten for 3 or 4 days and famines and droughts, it's nothing. But it's still something that we can try to address. And I was talking to Yukub about that old saying that's been around for a long time, you know, think globally and act locally. And I used to think that didn't make much sense until I realised, hang on a second, Valley, you haven't followed that through. If I act locally, then I'm spreading the tendrils out, and whoever is at the end of that tendril, they're spreading it out. Eventually it does get globally, you know. Food swaps, you know, is a good one. That kind of community spirit.
I think that's right. Like the think local, act global, isn't it? Act local, think global, which is it?
Think global, act local.
Yeah. There's a slight problem with that, because I think it tends to sort of blame the problem on the customer, when in fact quite often it's a business model that is causing the problem to occur. I mean, you look at emissions. You quoted a kilowatt. I did a footprint test. I think I'm sort of 7 to 10 kilowatts a day, which
kilowatt
is
hours.
Not too bad. Right?
That's really good.
Which is fine, and then you say, okay, like a larger house, maybe there's leakage in the heating, and maybe they've got too many appliances or something like that, and so they're using more power. But actually, like, where is the power from? Is it easy for me to access renewably generated power? And then why is it that I'm using so much power? Is it because the house wasn't designed properly? Is it because we've got a mental model now that says that big mansions are a demonstration of success in society? So there's all sorts of kind of cultural and social kind of issues that are connected to this. And to just say that this one person needs to change the way they're doing things, it's both a little bit unfair, but I think also unrealistic, because if you want to affect real change, and I'm talking about leverage here in what is a wicked problem and should be thought of systemically, then you have to consider supply chain theory and business models, and who are the stakeholders, and what other constellation of problems are causing this issue to come about. So, you know, there's a lot in this.
There is, but it becomes a battle of vested interest. Okay, I have a house. It's a brick veneer, and if you've looked at anything about building design, reverse brick veneer is what we should be having, the other way around. A brick veneer, it's got the minimum R rating bats in the walls and in the ceilings, and it's 4-bedroom with a theatre room. And God damn it, hey, hasn't the population fertility
this big.
Yeah, and the fertility rate goes down, and we're hardly having any children whatsoever. We have a little backyard where we can't grow anything. We've got this big house that is, might have some kind of star rating, but compared to overseas, it's rubbish. It's this idea of the house being an asset that plays a big role in people maintaining buying the same house. Because if I build a really small, beautifully designed, insulated house, that won't gain value as much as the Neo-Georgian, no-eave, 4-bedroom with theatre room house. So, because houses are an asset that people are thinking to make money, and this it started happening in the mid-90s. Right, before that, house prices were going along at a pretty regular rate, adjusting to the CPI. And after that, they just went crazy. So people see a house as not just a place to live. They see it as I'll stay here and then I'll upscale to a bigger house, and so I better have a house that makes me a fair whack of money. So that and the houses are really badly designed, but we don't need these big houses. We need smaller, beautifully designed houses that reduce our ongoing expenditure and are better for the planet and are better all round and are better for your peace of mind as well. That's a habitual thing. So, and then you got vested interests of like the air conditioning companies. Well, hang on a sec. If we build better houses, because you can build a house that requires no heating or cooling. Let's face it, they've been doing it for thousands of years. What happens to the air conditioning manufacturer? He's a vested interest in putting one HVAC system into every new house in Australia. So you're fighting against his vested interests, and you're fighting against the environmental building designer's vested interest of building a better house. Then you're fighting against the government who wants us to buy and sell houses every 5 years because of stamp duty. So it's a complicated scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, in terms of wicked problems theory, that you're talking about the priorities of different stakeholders there, and
isn't that always going to be the sticking point?
Well, unfortunately, the reason we define it as wicked is because there are no yes/no solutions. You can make things better, but you're never going to solve it, I don't think. Sorry about that, Veli. No. Actually,
no apologies necessary.
One of the introductions that I do in week 1 of sustainability is an apology to students because we're about to embark on 3 months of studying really depressing problems.
But the thing is, they'd be depressing if there was no light at the end of the tunnel and no potential for change, and there is potential. The tools are out there. It just requires the ideal sequence of events, the identification of these problems, finding, as you said, the leverage points. What's the easiest way that I can actually elicit change? But it's really nuanced and yeah.
I mean, I think like to speak about the current. We've covered so many topics. I can't remember whether we all did. We talk about BHP already? We did, didn't we?
We BHP, yes, we did. The mining, yes.
So I mean, this recent news, and I think that the energy debate globally, but specifically in Australia, is a really interesting sustainability issue, because like society can't survive without energy. It's you look at what's happening in Chile at the moment, and the society, people are really suffering there because of the US embargo. And then you get to the idea of industry, and when you're talking about extraction, the great, and it's a real thing, that the sustainable energy emission revolution can't occur without extraction industries, and I think
mining,
that's a true thing. And the point then becomes, well, how do you do mining sustainably? And BHP, I was so pleased to see some of their videos and read reports that they divested from coal. They're just buying it from other places, but that at least was a big step for them, right? That they've sort of said, we're not going to make profit from that. And then also reading that they're going to try to make the power that they use in their mine sites as renewables. That is using EV long-haul trucks and diesels for their, up in the Pilbara, they've got these huge trains, long, a kilometre long, that go from the mine to the port, and turning them into electrifying them. And then this report comes out just last week from journalists at The Guardian and Four Corners, from a leak, internal leak from BHP, where outwardly the company is stating that they're right on track and for 2030 and 2050 targets with emissions, but they've internally they've pulled capital from all of the projects because they say the tech is not there yet. Now, to me, like I go to the governance of the company with this because BHP, it's one of the world's, if not the world's largest mining company, and they've just come off the Mariana Dam collapse in Brazil, where 20 people died and the river system there was destroyed, and that happened in 2015, and BHP just I think that was in May, just last 1st of June, so just last month. They've been refused an appeal against the UK court's decision that they've got to pay £47 billion in remediation for that event. Now, that to me is a failure of governance of a corporation, and it's central to the idea of sustainability when you consider that it's the social, environmental and economic dimensions, right? Because it's a huge impost on the shareholders of BHP. First of all, if the shareholders have got to bear the cost of that fine that they will have to pay out. But second of all, the reputational harm that an event like that causes for a company of that size. Now, on top of that, to have that company come out and or have a leak, an internal leak come out that shows them as greenwashing such a huge project as they've got running in the Pilbara for export of iron ore, which is Australia's largest export. And just saying their claim is that the tech is not there yet, when you've just down the road got Fortescue that is piloting a system where EV large haul trucks, and they've got a diesel engine that they're testing at the moment. Now, what they're doing is they're in the middle of, I think, a 5-year pilot program where they're testing all of that technology. These are the largest corporations around the world, right, and certainly in Australia. It is their job to pilot these programs so that we can roll out this technology. And so to discover that BHP has been doing this in terms of the systems of this and then in terms of regulation, let's consider the stakeholders here. Well, when you're talking about BHP, you've got the local community, and that they're going to be Indigenous folk, the First Nations people and traditional owners. They're going to be local communities generally. Then you've got the people of Australia. I'm one of them, and I'm outraged at BHP's position on that. Then you've got the government, which is a huge stakeholder for BHP because of their interest in demonstrated in the Future Fund, but also in terms of their power to regulate and offer permits in concert with traditional owners, right? So you've got a whole array of stakeholders around this company running an operation. And all of those stakeholders have various levels of power to help or hinder the project and various levels of interest. Now, if I'm the CEO of BHP, I'm a fool if I do not consider all of those stakeholders. And so to imagine that a company like that, they're sitting around a table and all of the people, the CEO, the legal officer, the marketing officer, the operations officer are sitting around and saying, well, what are we going to do about electricity in the mine site? And for them to sit and come out of that meeting and say, it's too risky, the tech isn't there yet, I think we should pull capital and divert it to somewhere else. I think that's a failure of governance because they have not considered all of the stakeholders. Now, this theory of sustainability, it's there, right? If you've done an MBA at a business school, you should have done your homework on that stuff, because this sort of a decision comes back and bites them reputationally. And you look at the relationship to Fortescue. I know, if I invest, I won't go near BHP. I go to Fortescue if I want to invest in a mining company. So it has real economic effects, these environmental decisions that they're making.
Surely when they do their cost-benefit analysis, they take that into consideration. And these fines and this drop in perceived credibility is the cost of doing business. Unless someone has made intrinsically a very bad or a series of very bad decisions. Because I see, because we're not talking morals and ethics. We're talking about a business that has obligations to their shareholders to create wealth and an obligation to make profit and economic and grow. So I would assume that they were well aware of the ramifications. They would have done the modelling to go, well, if we do this, we're going to get slapped on the wrist and this is going to happen and da-da-da-da-da, and the risk ratio, blah, blah, the risk matrix is this, and they go, okay, we're going to do it. Because why else would they do it? They're not stupid people unless it was a bad mistake and they were right on that balancing point. Because I don't disagree with anything you've said. So you see what I mean? And we're in it.
So these journalists are Christopher Nouse and Adam Morton, and they deserve to be cited because they did a darn good job on the report in The Guardian. And one of the things that they said from these, they did a long analysis of it. One of the things they said was that the company will need to handle the reputational fallout when they step back from commitments they've made for net zero in their extraction processes. And to me, that shows an intentionality about the decision. It wasn't just a financial cost-benefit analysis. They actually did consider the stakeholders, such as you and I, that have an opinion about it, such as the media, such as traditional owners who have a stated interest in country and in the environment that we live in, and said we're just going to have to wear it. We have to figure out strategies to weather that media storm when we have to announce this. Problem being that someone inside the corporation, a whistleblower, had a social conscience and said they should be pulled up on this. So I think, look, getting back to the original thing about regulation and government intervention, it seems to be that government gets involved in business when there's a problem, when there's a big scandal, there's an outcry, and government steps in and makes legislation. And
they're totally reactive, never proactive.
Yeah, and so I think that in this case, given the size and importance of BHP to the Australian landscape, both in terms of economics but also culturally, I would be surprised if the government doesn't have a response, both in terms of policy statements but also, I think that having some kind of a regulation in terms of caps on emissions, and it's dangerous territory because Julia Gillard tried to do it and Tony Abbott and that mob, called it a tax on carbon. And then we waited 15 years for an emissions policy. So, it's got a vexed history in Australia, this policy. But I think that within the next year, I wonder if Chris Bowen is going to come out and say something about this case, because it's a big event.
Now, you've got to be pretty careful at the moment because they're not very popular at the moment, the Labor government, with obviously the rise of the One Nation, which are the preferred party now, according to the ABC this morning as I drove in.
That's so.
It beggars belief. I personally think it's that whole era of conservatism that seems to be sweeping through everywhere. So the sustainability class you teach, how long? What? So it goes for 3 months. Is it a 3 month?
Yeah, it's a trimester. It's 12 weeks. Each week's a new topic, and generally speaking, it goes from the more theoretical definitions of sustainability, sustainable development goals, what shared value. So there's this concept from Laszlo and Zsseksenbauer about that the business can get value if the customer gets value, and that sort of relationship should be that's a pretty common sense approach. Wicked problems, systems thinking, and so once you understand that all of the problems of the world are wicked, then you need a system for dealing with them, and then we get into case studies. So we about mid-trimester, we've got a research case analysis where we choose a particular wicked problem. This trimester it was hydrogen, green hydrogen, the rollout of that, which is a really interesting topic. I mean, I think it's a fabulous topic subject to teach, because each trimester you dive into new research on a new topic. The one of hydrogen is really interesting because, Australia's, I got the stats here, Australia's number one export, iron ore, that's 18% of our export, followed closely by coal at 11%, gas 10%. So you got fossil fuels at 21% of our export. And coming in fourth is education at 8%, right? And if Australia really wants to do anything about the net zero target 2030, then we're going to have to fix that export problem. Hydrogen was what we were looking at. And so we set up, so there was this, look, it's a brilliant story. There were researchers at Wollongong University, this is a couple of years back, that discovered a process with hydrolysis, making hydrogen out of water, where they could increase the efficiency 25%. Now, if you're talking about production of hydrogen, that's a major invention, huge. Right? And the federal government got involved in that. They formed a company called HySATA, and they set up a pilot program in Queensland together with the then Labor Queensland government. And then just at the start of this year, the newly elected Liberal government walked it back and said, there's too many problems with hydrogen, we're going to shut down the project, we're not going to support it anymore. And so you're faced with a classic example of a wicked problem, because you've got two stakeholders, federal government and state government, that have different priorities. And you'd have to say that this was not just cost-based but ideologically based. But then you've also got the issue of supply and demand. So if big industry like BHP steel making wants to use hydrogen to make steel, they got to retool their whole shop.
Okay.
And that means that they need reliable supply. And so they need a hub like the hub in Queensland that the federal HySATA had set up. There are quite a few other places over northwestern Australia. There's a hydrogen place there as well, green hydrogen. The other problem is a thing called embrittlement, right? So hydrogen is a really light element.
Yes.
And it forms cracks, it makes metal lose its ductility, its elasticity,
okay.
And so it goes brittle. It forms cracks and lets the hydrogen out. So that's a problem to figure out in terms of the transport of it. But then you've got benefits with hydrogen, like turning it into ammonia, which is this synthetic fertilizer, which means that you're not sort of making fertilizer out of other things. There's other problems associated with that, like runoff from nitrogen,
Absolutely.
things like that, right? So there's all of these, I've used the word constellation. There's all of these constellations around hydrogen. But if you look at the Australian export industry, up there at the top are three heavy fossil fuel energy sources, right? And this golden light there is hydrogen, because you can export like Twiggy Forest and Cannon Brooks had this project set up to send solar power to Singapore, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of, it's still going, but it's struggling a bit, right? Whereas if you can do green hydrogen, you can chuck it on a ship as ammonia and send it.
Yeah.
Okay? But what you need is all of those stakeholders to get together. First of all, heavy industry to retool, manufacturing sites. You need the politicians to come on board and send a clear signal like they have with renewable energy in the Future Fund. All of these people have got to come together to make that a reality. And we were talking before we started about the stupidity of Australians with our innovations and sending them offshore. What's happening in Africa? The Germans are teaming up with Mauritania and Nigeria, and they've got 2 green hydrogen sites setting up.
Wow.
And like we could be exporting to Korea and Japan and China and Europe as well, green hydrogen. And if we let those other guys get in first, we lose the first bite of the market, right? So it's really important that all of those stakeholders that I've mentioned, big industry, government, the researchers that are pulling out these incredible breakthroughs in technology, that we get them together so that we can make something really work. And I do have a vested interest for Australia, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, not only Australia. I mean, we are one of the world's largest emitters if you factor in our export of coal.
We are.
It would solve that problem.
Very high emitters, even from a domestic perspective. Now, we've talked a lot. It's coming to the end, but I want to say something. Jazz. Let's talk a little bit right at the end, a little bit about jazz. And I'll start off with something. I was listening to Paul Grabowski talk about the Miles Davis album, Some Kind of Blue. And they're talking about, so any musicians out there, they're talking about the modal approach to music. And that album, apparently, none of the players knew what was going to happen. They walked into the studio, Miles gave them bits of paper and said, these are the scales you play within. And we're talking John Coltrane, we're talking all these, and they went for it. And it's it's classed as that cool jazz. Well, what's your and I like jazz myself. So, what's your interest in jazz?
Well, you're naming some of my favourites there. I saw Miles Davis play in Sydney. When was that? I guess it was the 70s. Must have been, you know. Like one of the most incredible concerts I've ever seen in my life. And I studied jazz when I was a kid. So I know what you know, the circle of fifths is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I've just recently saw a potty about it. I don't think it was Miles Davis. I think it was John Coltrane. Came in and gave to a pianist this piece of music, which was following around the circle of fifths. So, you know, you start at C and go to G. You go from G and go to D. You go from D to F, D, A, right? It's been a while. And the pianist, you can see this video because the guy unpacks it all. The pianist is lost in this, right? He's going, oh, we're which key now? We're which key now? And I think that first of all, I think it was Coltrane, could have been, I'm not sure, but it's nasty of them to just throw it at a pianist like that. But then to see someone reach for that innovation. It's aspirational. It's inspiring to see that, isn't it?
What do you play? What instrument?
I used to play guitar, saxophone. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I play guitar, not considering how long I've been playing, not very well, but I did play tenor, saxophone, and bass clarinet. School band.
Wow.
I went to a government school, but it was very progressive. They had this American band leader, and we had a bit of a band, orchestra kind of thing. And my first jazz record I ever listened to was Fat Swallow, and I still like Fat Swallow. It's just, yeah. And if you read them, there's a biography on
Here
it.
we are, out of cigarettes.
Wow. No, he's just that. Every time I listen to the music, it puts a smile on my face, and he mastered that stride piano. And but anyway, yeah, it's yeah, wow, it's such an interesting. I've spoken to a lot of people about music over my years, and yeah, jazz is a funny one because there's so many different kinds, you know. And that's that eclectic, crazy, Thelonious Monk kind of stuff, and then you've got those progressive jazz, like that sort of like, John, what was it? Mahavishnu Orchestra, John McLaughlin, weird, scalloped his like the frets on his guitar was scalloped out so he could play these notes in between the tone, semitone kind of stuff. So. But is music a big part of your life still? Like
very much.
Yeah.
I mean, the show that we're doing at the moment, it's not music theatre, but it's got a lot of songs in it. And the design that I've built for the show it's set in outer space.
Wow.
Okay, so you said I could plug.
Yeah, you absolutely.
There you go.
So I put my glasses on. What
Corporare, which is Latin for making the body, and it's about tech bros in outer space.
Oh,
yeah. And it's actually got pretty strong sustainability themes in it. But I made a spaceship out of bamboo and muslin and things like that, and it's a kind of a musical instrument as well, because you can when you tap bamboo, it's got tune to it. So we use that as a basis for some music in it.
So this is on between the 17th and the 27th of June. Explosives Factory. That's an interesting. What a great
It used
name.
to be an explosives factory.
Near the laneway of 67 Inkerman Street, St Kilda. Tickets on sale now.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
With Theatre Works down there, beautiful theatre company in St Kilda. Yeah.
Created and performed by your good self. That's really good. A gorgeously low horror sci-fi about a tech bro and his rocket adrift in Martian dreams. Oh wow! Is it sort of? Yeah, it sounds very interesting. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
And is this is your latest play? Now, you got to tell me about the books you've written too. You mentioned it before, but I want you to right at the end of the podcast, which we are at now.
It's a trilogy. It's a series, The Curse of the Matsumoto Cherrywood. Matsumoto is a place in Japan. There's a beautiful castle there if ever you're in Japan.
Never been, no.
Got to get the train out to Matsumoto and go check the castle out. And I guess the stories come from my experience working in theatre in Japan. I've worked, it was over a period of 20 years. I guess I've done 10 or 15 plays over there, and worked with some beautiful Japanese actors and writers and directors, and became, I guess I immersed myself in the culture. You couldn't help when you're working on Japanese writing in theatre. I worked on a couple of Kurojuro plays, for example, who is one of the seminal contemporary Japanese playwrights. You're kind of tapping into the culture in that way. And while I think that there is a lot in common between our Australian culture and Japanese culture, I mean, and then if you're talking about theatre culture, there's universal things in terms of the trade of theatre that you recognise the moment you walk in and meet people. But there's also, we were talking earlier about the reverence for the seasonality of produce, for example. I think, perhaps at one stage we had that, but it's been lost largely because of the availability of products in supermarkets. That kind of, and then it's a concept they call wabi-sabi, which is pretty untranslatable, but it's sort of talking about the aesthetic essence of nature around. And maybe it's because of the people that I've been exposed to over there, working with artists. Maybe they have a heightened sense of that. I'm not sure. I don't really know. But because of that, I became very interested in the literature, and I've studied a chap called Archtagal Yunosuke, who's one of the first contemporary novelists, and his mentor, Natsume Soseki. Beautiful, beautiful writers. And they influenced me a lot in my writing. And then the other influence, I guess, is working. There's a Japanese theatre artist that works in Melbourne called Yumi Umare, a dear friend. I've known her for decades now. We've worked on a couple of cabaret shows, one of which was a ghost story, and so I got immersed in the ghost story genre of Japan. Big, long. Lafcadio Johann is the sort of the seminal author, who actually isn't Japanese. He was a Chicago newspaper person, but had a Japanese wife, and got into the folk tales that way. So the stories that I wrote are, it's a ghost story about Japanese art, ukiyo-e, Japanese woodblock prints, and an Australian detective that becomes infected with a curse.
Right.
And he ends up going across to Japan to try and solve the problem. What's wrong with me?
I'd like to read that one. That sounds interesting. Yeah.
So it's been quite it ended up being about 15 years to write these. The third book will be out the moment that play is finished.
Wow.
I mean, it's been finished for quite some time, but I've just been distracted with other things like writing plays and performing and teaching and work and life and stuff. But yeah, it's out soon.
Wow. And are you the kind of writer you I'm sitting down at 9 o'clock and I'm going to write through to this time? Like, are you quite disciplined?
Not so
like
much.
That?
I mean, that implies that I need that. I find when I'm in the middle of writing something, I'm fanatical about it. I just
Wow.
Any spare moment I get, I write.
Right.
So 3 hours can go by and I'm still at it.
You're in the flow state.
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, there's different I'm not advocating for any one method over another, but personally, I've never really kind of been regular in that way. And I think that's largely because my life has so many scheduling demands in other areas. I just got to grab the time when I can get it.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's interesting. No matter what we do, it's our most precious resource, isn't it? Time and what we do with our time.
Yeah.
I definitely want to read this. It sounds very interesting. Very interesting indeed. I'd like to say we're coming to the end. Thank you so much for coming in. I'm so glad that Ayuka mentioned you. She said you'll be a great guest, and you've exceeded my expectations. I've had a ball, and thanks very much.
Fantastic to meet you, Vali. I mean, honestly, it's great. To be honest with you, as a sustainability teacher, it is fantastic to meet someone that is actually in a company that is being part of the change, right? Like it's so important for Australian companies to be going for it, because it's crucial to us, to our survival. We have to do this. So it's nice to be welcomed inside the doors of a place that's actually getting it done.
Our pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.